Hello, fifth graders. It's time for some social studies. You need your social studies book. Open up to page 85, and you need your chapter 8 packet. And we're going to be on page 9, the very last page. So we're finishing our chapter 8 today. I'm going to read this little chapter summary to you, and then we'll complete the dilemma 1, 2, 3 that you see on page 9 together. Here we go. Chapter summary. In this chapter, you read about slavery from the point of view of West Africans. You used a map of the slave trade to learn about the dilemmas that West Africans faced. On the map, you tracked how slave traders moved Africans west towards slavery in North America. And we're talking about the map. You saw the map that had the triangular trade system. That's what they're referring to. In the first part of the slave journey, West Africans were captured and sent to the coast of Africa. In the second part, they struggled to survive the horrible journey across the Atlantic Ocean. That voyage was known as the Middle Passage. Finally, the newly arrived Africans responded in different ways to their lives as slaves in America. In the next chapter, you will tour the city of Williamsburg to learn about what daily life was like for the African American and white colonists. How was colonial life like your life today? How was it different? Read on to find out. So that's kind of like the trailer for our next chapter. All right, so go ahead and get your packet in front of you. And this whole chapter was basically about the dilemmas that the West Africans faced. It was being able to kind of walk in, like put yourself in their shoes. And the first dilemma that we had talked about was trading people for guns in West Africa. Trading people for guns in West Africa. And remember, you were kind of faced with 3 different choices, and none of them were good. That's what makes it a dilemma. So kind of summarizing this, West Africans valued family and ancestors. Some people in West Africa were not free. They had been captured in war and or were guilty of crimes. It wasn't the same kind of slavery system that the Europeans brought, but there were some people that were not as free as other people. Africans traded these people for guns to become, their goal was basically to become wealthy. So the choice that they had to make, the choice was to trade people for guns. Like, are we going to do that? And these were the 3 different scenarios. So scenario number 1, they could refuse to sell slaves to Europeans. The second choice was they could raid other villages and capture people to trade as slaves. So raid other villages, and capture people to trade as slaves for guns. And then the third choice was to trade your own servants, prisoners of war, and criminals for guns. And remember, we had to kind of decide which one of those choices would you make if you were faced with that. And it was a tough decision to make, and that was an actual decision that people had to make. All right, the second dilemma in summary was surviving the Middle Passage. Surviving the Middle Passage. So the people that were enslaved faced a terrible journey. The passage took anywhere from 21 to 90 days. Enslaved Africans were chained together. Serious illness occurred. And 10 to 12 million people died along the journey. And we had discussed how horrible the conditions were. on these, they called them slave ships across the Atlantic Ocean. So the choice in how, if you were coming from West Africa and you were captured, the choice you had to make was how you're going to react to these terrible conditions. How to react to terrible conditions. So some people, they chose to refuse to eat and resisted any help from the slave traders or other captured Africans. In essence, they were choosing death. Some others chose to organize a revolt or rebellion against the slave traders, knowing that the likelihood of them being killed in the process of it, it was very likely, but they chose to risk it, to fight. And the third choice was just to try to maintain strength and survive the voyage. And I know in class there were quite a few that had picked this choice here, and I did have several that chose either of the others, and there's no right answer. All of these are horrible choices to have to make, and these were the choices that these people actually had to face. All right, the third dilemma, it was once they arrived in the colonies. So the third dilemma is living as a slave in the colonies. Okay, and in summary of that, when they arrived after their journey across the Middle Passage, slaves, the enslaved Africans, were first sold at slave auctions. They worked on sugar and tobacco plantations. And the types of workers that had the hardest life were the field workers. They were mistreated and beaten. And they had to live in a single tiny cabin, many people. So these were the conditions, and their choice was how to react to this horrible injustice. So the choice, how to react to this injustice, to being treated so poorly for no reason. Some people chose to run away from the plantation. And you should have discussed the risks of that. Many of them were caught, and the consequences, if you're caught, are pretty horrible. Some chose to secretly resist slavery by breaking tools, working slowly, pretending to be sick, and singing songs with secret messages of escape. And others just chose to work hard and obey the rules. Set down by the slave owners in hopes that their family might be treated well and given an easier job, maybe to work in the home. So these were basically the three main dilemmas that West Africans faced when they were captured and sold into slavery. And you have your summary now. So your notes packet is complete. Thank you so much for all of your hard work.